Here's a quick look into today's episode.
The one thing I really been focused on in pre-command course is the area where I have the most anxiety. And I noticed that when I have to get on the stage and deliver, right? When I have to brief, if I get nervous about things, that's a sign of anxiety.
Then you go to General Clark. At the last minute, he pulls up his commander's priorities. It was the last thing he did after the conference was about over. And I was writing down so feverishly because he put this one slide comes up and it just said, in order to achieve the Indo-PACOM Commander's purpose, vision, a free and open Pacific, we're going to take care of people, we're going to improve partnerships, and we're going to prevail. So it was people, partnerships, and prevail. And then he had like 3 things under each of them, and that was it. It was, how do we take care of people? Leadership development. We're going to focus on H2F and better understand the implementation of it. And then we're going to improve the soldier family experience. It was so clear in my notebook, I don't even have to look at my notes to just remember what those things were. And it made me think, how do I do that for our organization? How do I make it so simple what our vision is? Welcome to another episode of Teach Me to Fish, where our purpose is to help leaders better understand what drives people. In today's world, the core of recruiting and retaining talent revolves around leadership. And not just average leadership, but motivated, values-based, inspirational leadership. Our purpose is to get a little bit better every day. Progress equals small victories and stacking habits. Habits like getting up early, working your butt off, learning something new, being positive, and surrounding yourself with phenomenal people. What I wanted to do today is I wanted to spend just a few minutes, and kind of have a conversation about like what you've been learning over there at the pre-command course, because now, there's a lot of people that have recently found out about command. There's a lot of people that are getting ready to take command this summer. There's a lot of people that are trying to navigate like how they're going to do the pre-command course, how they're going to do their moves, how they're going to do their changes of command, no matter whether it's a fall time change of command or a summer, spring, of next year. So I've been talking to a lot of people about it. So I thought it was super timely for us to talk about that, what you learned out there. And so that's what I wanted to do today.
Yeah, it's as you know, it's 3 phases of pre-command course, and so Compos 2 and 3 gets a chance to come and experience that too. But for folks who are not taking tactical battalion command, their course is abbreviated, right? So both of those courses are at Fort Leavenworth here, and then you take your branch course wherever they prescribe. For me, it was Fort Benning. So I first of all, I think it's a great refamiliarization of tactics and just the doctrinal changes toward large-scale ground combat operations.
Mm-hmm.
I've really been I've been excited about that, and a chance to sort of talk to and see peers that you hadn't seen in a long time.
Yeah, for sure.
To pick their brains from their warfighting functions, to get re-green, as they're calling it.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's pretty good. It's a pretty good deal.
We always start off kind of like a stand-up. We always say like, what's the one thing that you got going on? What's the one thing that you've kind of picked up so far that's going to make everything you do as a commander easier or unnecessary? What's the one thing?
Yeah, it's so this is a shout out to Command Sergeant Major Michael Hall. I don't know if you know Sergeant Major Hall.
For sure.
He was the former Ops Group's Command Sergeant Major.
Mm-hmm.
And prior to coming to PCC, he and I had a talk, and he talked about anxiety. So the one thing I've really been focused on is, where do I have anxiety in my and knowledge gaps? What he told me was that, if you're asked that question about anxiety, that's a good way to identify risk. And it's a good way to kind of identify your blind spots. And so the one thing I've really been focused on in pre-command course is where the area where I have the most anxiety. And I noticed that when I have to get on the stage and deliver, right? When I have to brief, if I get nervous about things, that's a sign of anxiety. And that tells me, okay, I need to dig a little bit deeper in whatever it is that's causing that anxiety. That's the one thing I've been really thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we talked about, especially with like General Gerard, I think I talked to him about is like anxiety comes from uncertainty and ambiguity. Uncertainty where you're not sure about what to do or what's going to happen, and then ambiguity is when you start to get multiple people telling you different things to kind of make a priority or to do things. So there's where your anxiety kind of is coming from.
Yeah, and part of it too is how we interpret doctrine. Because I know for me, there's different ways to express knowledge, right? That's what the art and science of command and control is. It's the
Hmm.
expression of knowledge. But everybody communicates differently.
Hmm.
And I think for so long throughout my Army career, I've tried to emulate what people say right looks like when it comes to briefing. There's a certain structure, and there's agendas. And if you don't do it that way, you feel like you're behind, when in reality, you just communicate different.
Yeah.
So I am learning through this process to find my own voice and to be comfortable being me,
Yeah.
as I execute and communicate the doctrine. And it's been really enlightening.
Yeah. Yeah. When I did a couple episodes, ago, when like episode 16, episode 20, and episode
Mhm.
28, where I talked about with other folks about preparing for command, and what were some of those documents that you started to look at, and what do you want to know? And I kind of, I started off by bucketing things into these three buckets, is about knowing exactly what it is, who you are, what I
Mhm.
believe. Bucket two is like figuring out what the organization needs, because you need to have a plan to figure out what they need to improve on, or what they need help with, and I call that winning. Like what's important now. And then like bucket three is like creating a culture of execution, and it's how are we going to achieve the things and get the results in these categories that we decide. Because sometimes people come up with a vision and they have an idea about what needs to be done, and they just simply don't know how to do it, or what exactly to do. And so those are the three big buckets that I talked about in those other episodes, and I kind of tap on a little bit today too.
Yeah, yeah. One thing I've been thinking about, I think I mentioned this to you, is at Fort Benning. I was only down there for a week, but it was predominantly maneuver folks. And I got a chance to see a spectrum of leaders from lieutenant all the way up to general officer. And I keep thinking about this, the idea that I saw four generations of leaders
Hmm.
who are all interpreting the Army their own way. You have the senior leaders, those GOs or soon to be GOs, and a lot of them are thinking about large scale ground combat operations, and they have a mental model of World War II in Korea, right? And so that narrative, they're using that narrative to push the doctrine. And then you have the my peer group, the field grades, came in post 9/11, who just want to get the next war right. Like
Yeah.
we want to go into it right, having harnessed the lessons learned, and we're talking to each other about that. And then those captains and those junior field grades are looking at us and the senior leaders saying, "Do I want that for me?
Mm.
Do I want to be like that?"
Yeah.
Right? And I've talked to them at Benning, and then you got the lieutenants, right, and the junior officers who are part of this new generation of thinkers, and they're more agile. They lack a little bit of resilience, but they want to know why they're doing what they're doing. And so I thought that was interesting, the four generations that I saw all colliding down there at Fort Benning. And I keep thinking about that.
Yeah. And then you go to Fort Leavenworth, and you don't have the captains group, and you don't have the lieutenants group. You don't have the junior
No.
soldiers groups, Has it been different when you got to Leavenworth?
Yeah, because what you're seeing here is you're seeing different cultures coming from different warfighting functions, and we collide in the classroom, right? So
Mm.
when you put 16 lieutenant colonels in a small group and you have to go through tactics, the one thing you have to remember is that your staff is not going to have that amount of experience and knowledge. So what you end up having stories that are retold about experiences and different ways to do things, and it's at a graduate level. And then you have the retired colonels that are helping you. And most of the vignettes, I hadn't gotten a dismounted airborne infantry vignette once. It's all been mounted striker, ABCT, and the vignettes from Korea and World War II, right? And so I keep that in mind that, the thing that I'm practicing on is not going to be the formation that I'm leading, but then also the peers that I'm working with, that knowledge is not going to be resident in my battalion, essentially, right? These are going to be captains trying to get through war game and MDMP, and so there's going to be some teaching going on, So it's not enough just to kind of say the doctrine and assume everybody understands. I have to translate. I have to do some translating. So I'm trying to keep that in mind because there's going to be a difference when I go down to my unit.
Yeah, I feel like as I listen to you say that, and I reflect back on, the time with you, time in the rattlesnakes, time now as I watch JPMRC and people go through the MDMP, I absolutely, when they say like the commander is a part of the process, that is precisely why. I think it's like you can come up with your commander's intent and you can put a few things together, but you've got to lead all these captains, lieutenants, majors through it, and you got to coach them through it, and you got to help them understand why and how and the whats that are going on. You can't simply just say a few things and then step out and then come back several hours later and expect it to be, a certain way.
That's right. But yeah, I love that though, because then you can go forward as a team,
Yeah.
and you understand your own language. You can model your TACSOP or PSOP after that, and it's not going to look the same as somebody else's.
Mhm.
And you just got to be comfortable with that, because you have to deal with the resident knowledge in your organization, and it's going to vary.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. What else have you picked up on in the first couple weeks being there? Or I think you're in your third week there now, huh?
I'm in the third week, and this is probably I'll elaborate more on this when we get it off our to get it off our chest. But doctrine's changing, and so the FM30 just came out. It took away decisive operation from the operational framework. They added influence as a form of contact. So we've been talking about that. We've also been talking about lessons learned from Ukraine and Russia, and the emphasis on getting back to fieldcraft, which is almost cliche, because every unit I go to, we talk about the importance of fieldcraft and doing more with less, and doing the simple things. So the big question that I keep coming back to is, how do you train for the calamity of large scale ground combat operations, right? And I'm thinking a lot about FM 7-8. I'm dating myself right now,
Yeah.
but like it's the basics. It's just the basics. And, it's very easy. This is one thing I'm learning. It's very easy to get wrapped up into the protection warfighting function, thinking about cyber and EW, but the basics: camouflage and cover.
Hmm.
Prepare hasty defense at a long haul. Like, if we do that stuff, then I think we'll be okay. So that's one thing. And then the other is for me, I'm very interested in the human dimension in the land domain of multi-domain operations. In FM30, there's a great logic chart, and it lays out, all of this complex stuff, all of the multi-domains and the jargon and the doctrine. And at the bottom of that logic chart is probably a rifleman,
Hmm.
right? It's a soldier at the bottom of it. And we can't forget that out of all of that ambiguity and the jargon and language, there's a soldier carrying a rifle, executing that.
Right.
And the moment that soldier puts that rifle down and picks up a remote control, oh, we're in
Yeah.
some trouble.
Yeah.
We're in some trouble. So I'm thinking about how to do that. Get back to the basics. I'm talking about compass, reading the compass, azimuth,
Hmm.
getting away from the technology, to at the echelons that need to understand. There's just a basic warfighting skills, right? Small
Yeah.
unit tactics.
Yeah. And you just came from Fort Benning, and I'd love to get back over there and find out how much of that basics that they're being taught there in the NCO academies, the junior officers that are right there at Bolick, so that it's not a surprise when they get out to their first unit and some of those basics. People say get back to the basics. They're like, I already am. I'm good at the basics right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's we got an opportunity when we were at Benning to do PT with the 75th Ranger Regiment.
Yeah.
And Colonel Boho and his team over there are some freaks of nature. It was great. But the one thing we talked about at the breakfast that we had was just the importance of reps and simplicity and consistency,
Hmm.
right? Repetitions. So that got me thinking on a small scale. If I'm doing a team live fire or squad live fire, if we're maneuvering 500 meters to get to the objective, why not cut that lane down to 250 meters and get another rep out of it?
Hmm.
Because we can train movement and maneuver in garrison, right? But what we can't do is pull triggers in garrison,
Yeah.
so to speak, right? So thinking about the ways to maximize training from a simplicity perspective to get more repetitions.
Yeah.
So I'm really thinking about that, and I don't want to make any presumptions about the unit. I'm not in the unit yet, right? So I don't know
Sure.
if they're doing that or if they're not doing it. But for me, it's like, how can you do more with less?
Yeah.
That's the question for me.
Yeah, I totally agree with the more repetition, the shorter lanes, the more repetitions that you get. The whole purpose of doing those kind of, a live fire lane is to get very confident in the weapon systems that you have, very confident in each other, and to be able to operate in those specific those specific moments. Then we had like the full mission profiles where you started to do everything else that came with the mission. I feel like the time to train on that is more like the situational training exercise, a stick slaying, where now the
Yep.
leaders got to make decisions, but they trust in their equipment, they trust in each other from the live fire, and then they build into the next thing.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to go sit in a semi-annual training brief to hear General Work and Command Sergeant Major Della Pena talk about training, and he had a statement. He said, "Your job is your weapon. Your job is your weapon." And so, if you do nothing else when you come to work every day, your job is the weapon that you operate on every day. You got to know what it feels like at night. You got to know what it feels like blindfolded, because that's your job. And that was a really unique perspective. I hadn't thought about that before.
Yeah.
My weapon is my battalion. That's
Mhm.
my job.
Yeah.
And so that's a good perspective to think things through with, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It seems like you've been able to take some time there at PCC and like really just get in the cave and do PT and go back to your room and get focused. What advice do you have for folks that are starting to think about like how to manage I just found out about command. When should I do my PCCs? Should I do them all together? Should I lump them together? How do I kind of navigate that? What have you found has worked for you?
Yeah. So I initially wanted to do all the phases together, but I had to return home for a family event. So inextricably, I had to break it up, which I thought was great because it gave me time to think about all the knowledge that I got.
Mm-hmm.
PCC is short, but is a lot of information. And the best thing about being here is that you can come back to the room and have time to think.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I kind of went back and forth saying, well, the Army is letting us know about command a year out, right? And I was like, man, that's just a long time, because you're just sitting on eggshells trying to assume what you're going to do. What products do I need? All of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And my advice would be to be patient. 19 years in, like, what to do.
Yeah.
So having the time to think about what you already know and just codify the things that you already know, and understand who you are. And this is the big decision for me, is to make the decision to be me,
Yeah.
and not to emulate what I think, the organization needs me to be.
Right.
Right. Because then I'm going to be a shell of myself trying to prove something to somebody,
Yeah.
when everything that got me to this point is who I am. So just take time, be patient, understand that you already have a good idea about how you want to lead, and think about the question, why do you do what you do? And do you still want to do that?
Yeah.
That would be my off the hip advice.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. From a big decision standpoint, what have you learned now? And you're like, I've got to go and do these things. Like these are some of the things that you're thinking about, but they've got to be the next big thing that you're going to have to work on when you head home or when you get into the unit. What do you got to get right first?
Yeah. So that's a good question. For me, it's visualizing, right? So I want to visualize the first 96 hours, like what that's going to look like. There's a lot of variables in there that I can't control, but be deliberate about where I spend my time, who I spend my time with, and then also set a great foundation for harmony with my family. So I don't just go in running, into an organization that has already been running. It's not my battalion. Like, it belongs to the soldiers and the legacy of the people who served before me. So I want to be conscious of that. And going back to the biggest decision I can make is just like deciding to continually be me and have fun. That's the other advice for folks that are about to take command. Like, you got to have fun with this stuff. And there's a slippery slope between
Mm-hmm.
emulation and authenticity, right? You can emulate something that you think is needed for that organization and lose authenticity with respect to how you do business. And soldiers are going to see that,
For sure.
And I go back to one thing you told me last week when you were out here. In a best case scenario, no matter what you do, you're going to be successful. And in a worst case scenario, no matter what you do, you're going to fail. So if both of those things are true, like you said, why not just show up and be yourself and have fun?
Yeah. And
So that's a decision. It's
yeah.
just to be me.
And you got enough experience at this point to know and to be confident enough that you got picked for this and that you got the experience, that being yourself is not going to be like, it's not going to be a departure from like what is expected of a battalion commander. Like you are going to demonstrate those things. I often talk about the, when you think about your unit and you think about what do I want my organization to be known for? Right.
Yeah.
Then you think about what do you want to be known for? And you say like, what do I want my reputation to be? When people think about me, they think about my name. It won't take long before the organization's reputation and your reputation are one in the same. And so if the organization is well-disciplined, well-prepared, very competent, you are well competent and disciplined and well-trained and prepared. Right. And flip side, if there's a lot of indiscipline happening in that organization, that becomes your reputation. When we talk about the commander and the command sergeant major kind of create that culture of an organization, your reputation will be almost one in the same of the reputation of that organization. It won't take long.
Yeah. I hope I can do it right. I thought about that. Quick story. I was down at Fort Benning, and I got a chance to meet up with one of the lieutenants that's in my battalion, the battalion I'm going to take over for. And he asked me, we're doing lunges. He goes, "Hey, sir, what's your vision for this battalion?" Yeah, I would never ask my battalion commander that when I was a second lieutenant, right? But I'm so glad he did. One, it's indicative of this new generation because they want to know, and he was genuine. I'm so thankful he asked me that. And I told him, and it just came off the top of my head. That's the other thing. When you come to PCC, they have you do these leader philosophies and visions. And the answer to his question was not the thing that I put down in my slides for PCC. And I told him, I said, we're going to continue to make this battalion a leadership factory, right? So when people think about the Red Devils, I hope they say, "Oh, that's a leadership factory over there." Anybody that comes out of that battalion is fit to lead. And that's the first thing that came up, and we finished working out. And then I elaborated on that later. But no, it was really great that he asked that question.
Yeah, and I think it's neither one of us probably would have said that to our battalion commander when we were a lieutenant, but now we're getting to the point where I think it's being a little bit more understood that if there's one thing like the senior leader of an organization does is it provides a vision for that organization. And General Gerard talked about that, about how you've got to come in with a plan. You've got to know where you think this organization is going, what its purpose is, and understand what that is, because there are so many audiences that are counting on you to articulate it in a different way. You got to articulate it different to the lieutenants than you do to the captains and for the senior NCOs, because they're in a different part in their life, right? But you've got to understand the vision so well that you can modify the message based on the audience.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I took a lot from that conversation you did with General Gerard about empowering others to reach their maximum potential. And if I'm remembered for that alone, I'm a happy man.
Yeah.
I'm a happy man. And I want to convey that in a way that doesn't make folks think that, Colonel Caldwell ain't lethal, because we can have that conversation too. But no, it's about taking care of people, the totality of the person, not just the soldier, but the person who wears that uniform too.
Yeah. If I could go back to like how many times there's either been in my career, a transition, a time of, in the 90s where we really weren't going to combat, we weren't going to war, we didn't have too many deployments, to then into the 2000s, right when 9/11 kind of kicked off, then you had 10 years into it. But the thing that has been consistent for so many years has been leader development. And the phrase of leader development is my number one priority. We've heard it so many times, right? Over and over and over. And I just came back from the commanders conference, the CTC commanders conference. And, we were bouncing back and forth with each of the CTCs talking about, what is the primary responsibility of a combat training center, right? And General Ryan, the G3 for the Army, said, the fundamental purpose of the CTCs is foundational leader development. Number one. He's like, when we go to these exercises, when we go to a CTC, it's foundational leader development. Number one, everything that we're doing there is about that, the developing leaders and giving them an opportunity to get into the crucible of training with the most amount of, opportunity to learn. And it was huge. The number two wasn't even nearly as close as number one, but his number two was the, testing out new equipment, testing out the formations, and making sure that the formations that we have today can do what it is they're expected to do. Transition and contact right now, and the way that we're trying to understand the best ways to use this new equipment, and the way that the formation is designed and set up. Is it achieving what we had hoped it would? That was the second biggest reason for the CTCs. I thought he did a really good job of, simplifying that for us.
Yeah, your podcast with Colonel Clapper brought that point home too, when he talked about leader development being a decisive point for interwar period Army. Mm-hmm. Really interesting. Sergeant Major De La Pena just published an article about team leaders. Are we developing team leaders? Because when I was a platoon leader, team leader was like the center of gravity for that platoon. Mm-hmm. Like if you want to influence change in that platoon, you get to the team leader, because they're looking the soldiers in the eye. And they're impressionable enough to want to be the platoon sergeant. Hopefully, most of them are. And so for junior leaders, when I talk to junior leaders, I say grab hold of those team leaders and make sure they're being developed. And Sergeant Major, his article is on the NCO Journal, but he talks about doing it one-on-one, not just from the big venue. But I think counseling should be done that way anyway. Sure. And quite frankly, I don't know that we do counseling well in the Army. Which gets me, I'm not going to talk about the get off your chest, but that's a part of it, is like spending time one-on-one developing people. Even if that's informal counseling. We took a walk, you and I took a mile walk after we worked out, and we just had conversation. Yeah. That's developmental counseling, from mentor to mentee. And people neglect that because they probably do it every day. They're just not deliberate about it.
Yeah.
Right. And not deliberate about it.
Or you just don't understand that it's happening, and it becomes such commonplace, where you're getting a little bit of advice every single day. Like, how could counseling be done during PT? If it absolutely can. It doesn't have to be in your office for 45 minutes with the door closed, just one-on-one with two notebooks out in front of each other. Like, sometimes the best conversations you and I have had are 3 miles into a run, and you don't have your notebooks in front of you, right? And you have that moment, and I think it is making the most amount of your time, and stacking two of the things that are your favorite things to do, doing them both at the same time, right?
That's right. When I was young officer, I can't believe I just said that. I just dated myself. I feel old now. When we used to run with the battalion commander, he would run slow, 9:30, 10-minute pace. And I missed it because in my head, I'm like, why aren't we running faster? Like, what is this about? Not thinking that we're running at a conversational pace to develop, right? He's having a conversation with us. And all I'm thinking is that thunder over there?
Yeah, it's very shocking that there's I don't know if I can count on one hand the amount of times that we've had thunder here in Hawaii. If it's not the rooster right outside my window, it's a huge storm. We got a big storm right now, and so there's thunder out there. That you heard it.
No, that's good. That's good. That's good for sleeping. But no, but I used to take that for granted because I just wanted to run fast, not thinking about a 9:30 pace run. You can get some good developmental counseling in doing something like that.
Yeah. And now it's just part of what I do. Every time I go for a run, I'm either listening to something, listening to a podcast, listening to, something to get motivated, calling somebody, I go on a walk. As soon as you call me, the headphones go in, I walk out the door and I go for a walk while I'm doing those two things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, yeah. Speaking of walking, Andrew Batul is probably out doing that right now.
Yeah, he probably is.
Getting his miles in.
He did 127 miles in the first week, for 127 for the Wolfhounds.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So back to I want to go back to like leader development and how it's like the foundational thing that we're doing. We're doing it right now. You and I having a conversation
Hmm.
about it. We do it with everybody during the interwar period. I think Mike was hit a home run saying that it was the decisive point. Um, has there been any surprises as far as leader development since you've been there doing this PCC? Has there been anything that hit you that you were like, was a bigger deal than you thought it would be?
Yeah, for sure, sir, for sure. I got to be delicate with this, because there are many different ways to do leader development, and this recent military review that just came out, I was kind of not taken aback, but it was really great to see a cadet from West Point published in the military review, right? And then there's the Center for Junior Officers as well, and
Mm-hmm.
there was a cadet that wrote an article about Plato, which is pretty ambitious to link Plato to leadership, and that'll go over a lot of people's head. But when I read that article, I thought it was so insightful and refreshing that young people are taking that approach to trying to figure out leader development. Um, and the Army has shifted their focus, or emphasized more the aspect of writing and these podcasts, right? Which is a creative way. But then you still have naysayers out there. This irks me that for some reason think that leaders have to be single-minded, right? Like not multidimensional. Like we can't do two things at once,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And so I've seen a little bit of that. There's a little bit of ambivalence with the way people choose to do leader development,
Yeah.
right? Because the resources are at our expense to do it differently. We don't just have to do the sit down counseling. You could do a podcast,
Mm-hmm.
or I could write a letter to that cadet and publish it through those means to have a conversation to
Yeah.
show junior leaders that they can write in their own voice too. You don't have to do, citations and all of these things.
Right.
Like we want to hear from you. So I think there's got to be a little bit more appetite for the variety of ways that we do leader development. Because
Yeah.
there's some folks out there who don't want that because you can't control it,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And when you lose control of it, you get afraid of it. But ultimately, it's to better the profession. So, um, you know, that's been interesting to see.
Yeah, and not just the better the profession, but better the people that are in our organizations, right? That we all read a book, we put out the book, we say, hey, we're all going to read Legacy. General Clark was talking about this at his commanders conference the other day about how we all read Legacy when he was the division commander, and then we all
Hmm.
sat down at the table at the tables with a group of 5 to 7, and you talked about what you learned, what parts of that book, and you shared it with each other because we were all going through it, reading the same book at the same time, right? And we were all sharing what we were learning with each other. And you can't fake the funk when you're in a group of 5 to 7, right? So
That's
it was
right.
super helpful.
And what's interesting about what you just did is, you described a book club. Now, if I go into a classroom, if I go over here to PCC and I say, "Hey guys, let's start a book club," they're gonna look at me like I'm crazy.
Yeah.
Who does this guy think he is? Want to start a book club, right?
Yeah.
And so, but that's my frustration with it, as if self development and learning is somehow taboo.
Right.
Like, I don't get it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
Well,
that's what you just described.
there's sometimes where it's like, you get called to try hard, or you get called to somebody that like cares about doing
Yeah.
better or like wanting to learn, and they're like, what a dork, you want to go out there and read a book and get better at what it is you do. And there has to be a little bit of humility that maybe you don't know all those things. There's still so much you have to learn. Sometimes they're afraid. They're like, hey, I don't want to admit that I don't know these things, or I don't want to admit that I can't articulate myself well. If I read this book, maybe I'm a slow reader and I don't want to embarrass myself when everybody else is halfway through the book and I'm still on the first chapter and I can't say what I took from it because I'm not good at, my comprehension level isn't as good as other people, right?
Yeah. Hey, the most powerful three words in command and control is "I don't know,"
Yeah.
right? Because it opens up a way for knowledge. If you try to tap dance, then we're gonna keep digging a hole. But if you don't know, let's help. You got a team that can help you. So I agree.
Yeah.
I agree, sir.
Yeah. Um, Back to like big decisions, things that we got coming up that are on your mind. One of the things that's on my mind right now is like, how do I take this leader development and share it with as many different audiences as I can? How can I benefit, learn, as a leader as well? And I'm recently going to start working with ROTC a little bit more and start sharing in the same way that I've been working with West Point and Mike Klepper and the folks out there to help share these lessons with them. Yeah, I want to start sharing with the ROTC cadets and all the different programs that are out there. And this, going into Tuskegee, and I went to
Sure.
Armstrong and Georgia Southern. That there's so much opportunity out there. I went to Cadet Command last week when I was at Fort Knox at HRC. I stopped by and spent some time with Cadet Command. And we're going to start working together. I'm going to do an episode with a friend of mine, Jason Wayne. He's the 1st Brigade commander. And then we're going to start talking to some of those cadets and seeing what's on their mind, whether they're a junior or a senior, as they're getting ready to go out to the force. What are they thinking about? What are they nervous about? What are they prepared for? What have they been told to expect, and start sharing that with people like you and me, so that more people can start to understand what they're about to get with these junior officers coming out to the force. I'm going to start working on that here soon.
That's going to be great. That's going to be great. I did a talk to a class of MS4s. It was virtual, but this is like maybe a month ago, and they all have this. They have the same questions that I had when I was a cadet. There's a bit of inferiority complex because they want to come in and measure up right off the bat. So they want to know the things that they can do to prepare. They want to know how to counsel their platoon sergeants and their NCOs and subordinates. And then they want to know how to be a good peer without being a tryhard, right?
Right.
And so all of the questions kind of revolved around that. But those are the same questions I had when I was a cadet in ROTC.
Me and our deputy commander, Trevor O'Malley, we went and visited with the MS4s and the MS3s at the University of Hawaii here. It's about 10 minutes from our headquarters. So we went and spent about 3 hours with those people. What I read, as I read between the lines based on the questions that they were asking me, they were having a hard time delineating the difference between being a great team player and then also excelling and being and performing well, right? And it's they are confused a little bit with, you want me to be the world's best team player and help everybody and help all my teammates left and right, up and down. But then we have this thing called an evaluation.
Yes.
Right? And in the evaluation, it's not clear in one of those categories how you're going to rate that person based on being a great team player. So we say be a great team player, but we rate you on getting results, PT score, competitive, and then we do these things called enumeration, right? Number 1, number 2, number 3, right? And so it's like, well, are you saying that the number 1 team player is automatically number 1? And it was hard for them to. I could see them trying to ask those questions, and they were coming at me from different directions, about that topic, those topics.
Yeah, it's hard, but you gotta, and this is easier said than done, I know, but you gotta let go of the worry of evaluations. But because if you tie yourself to that, and this is why I tell them, then you're chasing something you can't control, first of all, right? That's in somebody else's hands, right? But second of all, you neglect your strengths. And so my advice to them is, don't judge yourself off of the strength of your peers, right? Go in and be confident being you, and maybe find one person that you want to emulate and tell them that you look up to them, and try to ride their coattail. But then you shrink everything down to 2 people. One person you want to emulate, and then the other person you're trying to help. But don't worry about the evaluation, because you can't control that anyway.
Right.
Yeah. But I know that's easier said than done. I get it.
Yeah, it's much easier said than done, especially when then there's a class, on how to do evaluations, and then there's, it gets talked about, and then as you get older, they become more important, and it's like, well, easy for you to say, you're a colonel now, you can say you don't have to worry about, evaluations and such.
Yeah.
But that was an area where they're struggling with. at the youngest level, right? They haven't even spent a day as an officer yet, and they're already, they're thinking about those things because they want to understand it. They want to understand if I go out there, what are your expectations? And that's the biggest question you get, right? What are your expectations of brand new officers, coming out to these organizations? And we always talk about being the best team player. We always talk about the person that's always learning. That's learning a little bit every day. They don't have to show up with the world's most amount of talent and have the answer to everything and work with people.
You know what I look for? You know what I look for is who is the junior officer or leader, period, who is enthusiastically executing the thankless job? Who is that person that's just doing the job that is thankless, making the coffee, taking out the trash, shredding the secret stuff, and doing it like they love it.
Yeah.
Right? Because you can see that person. And I'm not thinking about evaluations, but that person brings out to me because I can put that person in a tough position, and they're going to bring spirit with them, right? So most officers think they're going to come in, they get a platoon, they lead. You're going to staff. A lot of them going to staff, and they're going to do a lot of thankless jobs. And leaders are looking. We're watching.
Yeah.
Who's doing a thankless job with enthusiasm?
Yeah. I spent some time last night. Me and Christy went to the Rattlesnakes ball, and and we were just smiling as we were looking around. It was like when you said you go to Costco and you get people watching, and you went to the Royals game today by yourself, right? So you're like people watching. Well, me and Christy were people watching last night at the ball, and we're looking around at these couples. We're looking around at the brand new privates. We're looking at the soldiers that are there by themselves, that are with their squads and their teams. And we were at the Royal Hawaiian. What a venue. Unbelievable venue that the Rattlesnakes put on yesterday. Yeah. Might be one of the greatest venues I've ever been to any ball I've ever been to.
That's great.
But we got to see all these people, at different parts of their career. And when I talked to some of the junior officers and the NCOs, it rang like loud and clear that they really were taking care of their people, that they really understood that their primary responsibility was the soldiers that they were entrusted to take care of. The lieutenants, whether they were second lieutenant or first lieutenant, they were saying things to me like that all I care about is helping them reach their maximum potential. And to see the way some of these soldiers, there was this one point where they didn't know I was standing there, but I was walking back to the drink line, and I look over, and there must have been about 8 privates looking at this one sergeant like he was a god. And they were like, "Sergeant, when can we take our tops off? Like, when can we, it's starting to get hot." And he's like, "Not till after the formal portion. After the formal portion, and then they retire the colors, then you can take, and I promise you, tops are coming off. Like, it'll be great. The music will start." And they just like they smiled, and they were just looking at him like he had all the answers. And he was taking care of them. But he was coaching them up a little bit, right? And he was like, "No, stay disciplined. Keep your top on. Keep your tie on. We got to make it through another hour. God forbid Leclerc talks too long. He won't string it out too long." But it was so warmed my heart a little bit to see the way that they were looking up to that sergeant.
I tell you what, God bless non-commissioned officers. I love them. I love the non-commissioned officer. I was nurtured by them in JROTC, and I heard Sergeant Major Schmidt, you did the podcast with him. What a guy. They do have all the answers. They do. And, you listen to them. You will know the ones who don't know. You'll very quickly you'll figure out who they are. But generally speaking, we have a really, really great NCO Corps.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, anything in the big decision category before we kind of go to get it off your chest?
No, I think we covered that one. The only other one I would say is probably transition. To make this transition sustaining momentum. My predecessor that I'm taking over for has done a wonderful job. He reached out to me almost 7 months ago, and that's going to happen for a lot of those newly named commanders too. And he's just feeding me information without putting the pressure on me to make decisions now, just giving me situational awareness. So I want to transition with some momentum that he's already established. So that's in the back of my mind.
Okay. All right.
Hmm.
Well, for get it off your chest, I'll go first, and then I'll hand it over to you to talk
Yeah.
that a little bit. But like, here's my get it off my chest. I'm going into my third week in a row of Commanders Conference after Commanders Conference after Commanders Conference. Right? CTC Commanders Conference. I went to HRC. We did the USERPAC Commanders Conference. I'm doing our Commanders Conference on Monday and Tuesday with JPMRC in the 196th. And then we've got the core commanders conference, right? And here's my biggest takeaway from all these commanders conferences that I've watched. The more senior the leader that is speaking, the more clear and the more easier to understand their priorities and the direction, their vision for the organization. It was so clear, right? And as you made your way down, an echelon lower, as soon as it came time for somebody else to stand up and talk, it was, whether it was a slide, much more information, much harder to delineate the priority, lots of bullets, right? And we went from 3 things to 20 things, right? And it was as I get lower and lower, it's harder for them to prioritize. It's harder for them because they feel like they've got 1,000 things to do. And I can only imagine if you go from the 4-star to the 3-star to the 2-star, by the time you get to the company commander, they probably have 1,000 things that they have to do every week, every month, every quarter for their soldiers. That has it's like it's going through my head right now. And I'll give you an example. So the example is in the PACOM region, the Indo-PACOM commander, right? We're trying to establish a free and open Indo-Pacific. That's it. And you're like, that's it. Everything lumps into that, like free and open Indo-Pacific. Then you go to General Clark, and he pulled it up at the last minute. He pulls up his commander's priorities. It was the last thing he did after the conference was about over. And I was writing down so feverishly because he put this one slide comes up, and it just said, in order to achieve the Indo-PACOM commander's purpose and vision, a free and open Pacific, we're going to take care of people, we're going to improve partnerships, and we're going to prevail. So it was people, partnerships, and prevail. And then he had like 3 things under each of them, and that was it. It was, how do we take care of people? Leadership development. We're going to focus on H2F and better understand the implementation of it. And then we're going to improve the soldier family experience. I was writing it down. That's why it's so clear. It was so clear in my notebook. I don't even have to look at my notes to just remember what those things were. And it made me think, how do I do that for our organization? How do I make it so simple what our vision is, what the vision is? How do I make it so simple, and how we're going to move, how we're going to do partnerships? We're going to build and sustain relationships. We're going to be the world's greatest team player, right? Sounds very familiar, right? And then under his prevail, I'm starting to modify it to how do we prevail, not just in the region, but how do we prevail as our organization, JPMRC, the 196th, right? We have to transform. We have to create the Army's newest. We have to help the Army's newest CTC, develop and continue to develop. How do we train? He specifically said it. We're going to train using exercises and JPMRC. That is the vehicle in the Pacific. And then we're going to campaign through Operation Pathways. It was so clear. That was my biggest takeaway from going to these commanders conferences is, how do you make it as simple as possible for your organization and your people to understand what the priorities are and the direction that you're going?
Yeah. Do you think that you're closer to doing that for your organization?
Yeah, I think so, because it's easier for me to articulate how our 3 people, winning and transforming, fit into the Indo-PACOM free and open Pacific, the people, partnerships, and prevail. Obviously, the people were right in line with that, with the leader development, how we onboard our people, how we integrate H2F and take care of our people and increase the experience of our soldiers and families at JPMRC. But when we get into the partnerships and prevail, it's how do we increase interoperability through our exercises, I say winning. I call it winning what's important now. And that's the exercises that we're doing. We have to make those exercises that we do for the 25th and the 11th. We've got to make those the best exercise anybody's ever been a part of. And I think that's going to allow us to prevail as well. The one thing I've kind of pushed off into its own third bullet is the transformation, because I think that's not a sub bullet for JPMRC. It's, as the newest combat training center, we've got to transform significantly. We've got to grow the ops group. We got to establish our relationships with other people to achieve what it is we need to do as we slowly grow. There's no mistaking that there's only so many people out there right now. And if you're an organization that's asking for more people or more money, you're the last person that's gonna get any help around here. You got to do it with what you got, and you got to do it through influence and through relationships, because it's only going to get tougher in that area.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, at PCC, we hear from, a plethora of generals, all the G staff, commanding generals, in some part, combatant commanders, and they all tell us, what their strategic vision is, but then they quickly get to what you need to do to be a successful battalion commander. And I wish this was on video, because these are all the things that you got to do. I write them down now, and I'm probably over 150 things you have to do. And when I look at these, all I see is be, no, do. That's it. Be, no, do. And that's the Army's philosophy anyway on attributes and competencies, right? So, but to your point, I understand what you're talking, because it's impossible for me to do all of this stuff.
No.
So I keep this in the middle. I have a little stick figure, me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe I'll send this to you. So when you put this episode out, you can show.
I'll put the picture out there. I will. I just wrote down a note that says, send me the picture of that so I can put it out there and share it with people on the social media, and they can see what you're referencing to. So what's your get it off your chest?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this for a long time. It has to do with large scale combat operations, and there's two aspects to it. Number one is, I think, as I talk to people, leaders and peers, I think we as a profession need to do a better job defining our terms. And here's an example. Hey, Trivius, what do you want your battalion to be known for? Well, I want to be a professional warfighter and warrior, right? I want to develop professional warfighters and warriors and lethal, right? And then captains look at me like I'm crazy. They say, well, what does that mean?
Right.
So part of that has to do with understanding that lethality. The Army defines it as a capability and capacity for destruction, right? But lethality exists on a spectrum. You can be highly lethal, or you can be lethal enough to accomplish the objective without being ferociously destructive, right? That really matters. And if you can't understand the spectrum, of lethality, then you're not, I don't know that you can call yourself a professional warfighter. That's the first thing. The other aspect of this is that, we are warriors. We have been warriors for a quite long time. However, when we transition home with our families don't need warriors from the lethality perspective, right? So there's a spectrum there that we need to nurture, not only the warfighter, but we need to nurture the human too. And this goes back to counseling. And when I hear people talk about large scale ground combat operations, it's only from the perspective of a lethal warrior. And we almost neglect the fact that warrior has to transition home and be a family person to their partner, spouse, and family as well. So I think we got to do a better job of that. The other piece of this has to do with the complexity of large scale ground combat operations and how we train for it in a war period. Really think about this. So here's the problem. Along with the crazy op tempo where you never have enough time, people, or resources, you also have a bunch of warfighting functions with different time horizons. Everybody's on their own timetable and they speak their own language. And so the problem of the modern day leader, in my opinion, is how do you reconcile all of these different time horizons and speak a common language to have shared understanding? That is very, very difficult to do because we're never slowing down to do that work. You have to build the plane in flight, right? And that's a huge challenge. So I'm thinking about that, and then the inherent risk in the training environments to train for it. So everybody's talking about LSCO, but nobody's talking about how to train for the calamity of Lisco.
Mm.
It's like Mescal here, you're going to deal with a lot of death and destruction. So how do you inoculate people to that without causing them to lose their mind? And I would argue Ranger School, Arslick, those are great ways to do it, but everybody's not going to Ranger School or Arslick, Sapper School, Best Ranger. They're not doing that. So then how do you replicate that calamity in training environments and have a conversation about risk where you're not putting the family member and the family at risk of losing them, each other? Does that make
Mm.
sense?
Yeah.
This is a challenge I don't think we have figured out, because in part I think we have neglected one aspect of this Lisco conversation, and is that families exist too.
Yeah.
And so I can nurture the warrior all day long, but when I send the warrior back home, do I want that warrior, that lethal warrior, going back into the house with that mindset? No, you got to.
Mm.
The professional understands how to temper that, right? And so I just think we got to do a better job as a profession defining our terms. And it's okay to spend a little time explaining nuance.
Hmm.
It doesn't make you less of a warrior to do that. I think it makes you more of a professional to understand your capability and capacity for destruction. Because
Yeah.
if you don't, you get Abu Ghraib, you get My Lai massacre, you get all of these ethical and moral disasters, right?
Mm.
Um, that's just my take on it. But since I've been in PCC here, I've been in conversations talking with peers. Nobody that I have talked to is focusing on how to train for the calamity of large scale ground combat operations. It's just
Wow.
it's the narrative. The narrative is that we have to do it,
Yeah.
but nobody's talking about what that looks like.
Right. Sure.
Outside of TTPs from Ukraine and Russia. But all of the World War II rhetoric and the narratives there. Well, Patton never had drones.
Yeah.
Bradley never had the internet or cell phones and cyber. So we're in a different space, and I just think that we
Wow.
got to spend some time thinking about that. So that's my get.
Yeah.
That's my get it off your chest.
Well, I think if you combine that, what you got me thinking about is like this perfect storm, right? And the perfect storm is 10 to 15 years of, for a lot of folks that are senior now, of Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, multiple deployments. You go away for 6 to 12 months to 15 months. You come home, you try to reintegrate, but people did that for 10 to 15 years. Now we're starting to get into almost 10 years of not doing that, taking care of families, taking care of people back home, not being away from the family as often, right? And how do you start to combine those two and start to prepare people for being away, simply being away from your family, right? Like
Yeah.
that's wearing on people right now, whether it's 9 months in Europe. My son's on his second deployment. Brady's on his second deployment to Slovakia right now. And then you've got people, rotational units going to Korea, 9 months. They're away from their family. There are those kind of stresses. So you start to combine those. And then now the perfect storm is you throw on top of it, seeing some unbelievable things like when you go to combat and you go to war and you see and experience some unthinkable things in combat. When you put
Yeah.
that on top of those three that I just said, I think you have the perfect storm, and how we're gonna bring people back to get them back out on the battlefield and recover them. That's where I think we get into the H2F. That's why I think with the leader development, H2F, and understanding the soldier and family, experience with the military. If we keep going in that direction with those three things, I think we'll be more prepared for that calamity that you talk about.
Yeah, I hope so. I keep thinking about the infantry, and it's my job to manage violence, right? I mean, it's another way of saying close wouldn't destroy the enemy, but how can I manage violence if I don't know it? And that's a problematic statement. But how do you replicate violence in a training scenario where it's not paralyzing, right? Where you can see it, but it's not detrimental to your mental health. And I think creative and imaginative ways for junior leaders to do that need to happen. But with that, you're going to assume some risk.
Mm-hmm.
I've got to be able to manage risk if I want that to happen. And I think we have the appetite for it, but
Yeah.
I would like to talk more about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll have that. That'll be kind of our next conversation. Our next one will probably be something along the lines of how has the change of command gone? How has the has the things that you learned at PCC? How did those go into your first couple weeks as a commander? What worked? What didn't work? What were some of those challenges? Because that's coming up right in a few weeks.
Yeah, I'm super pumped. I'm super pumped to be a paratrooper all the way airborne. I'm ready.
Yeah.
I'm ready.
Yeah, you're going to be running up and down Ardennes with the music
Yes,
going.
I will. Yes, I will.
There's going to be so many people that are jealous of that, and I can't wait to hear. I can't wait to hear all about it. I appreciate you spending a few minutes with me on a Sunday afternoon to get talk about some of the things you learned, talk about it while it's fresh on your mind, get it out there while it's super timely to help as many people that are out there. I'm thankful to have you doing this with me. Doing this journey, going through it. We don't. You talk about mentor and mentee. I can promise you, we don't just learn from people that have more rank and more experience than us. We can learn just as much from people that are learning at a different point in their career. And I learn more from you every time we talk. And so I'm thankful to have you as part of my leadership development team.
I appreciate that, sir. Yeah, likewise. I feel the same way. I learn from you every time you talk. I listen to you on the podcast, so it's almost like a constant stream of mentorship from you and other folks. So especially the guests that I've not met but learned from, I really appreciate that. I did want to plug two books, and one is sitting right behind you, iGen. I think that's Gene Twenge. I'm reading that right now. It's fantastic. It is a fantastic kind of snapshot into the new generation of leader that we gotta lead and develop. And then the first 90 days, I've read that. That's Michael Watkins, helping with transitions. It's very good. Yep, right on your desk. Small victories. Small victories.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's those two books. First 90 days and iGen. Very good.
Yeah, the ones that are staring me right in the face because I keep them right here on my stand-up desk. And I look at them, at least once a week, if not twice a week. And the three big ones that I'm working that I've got right now, for a brigade commander standpoint, is the first 90 days, obviously, because I feel like if you review that every 90 days, boy, you're on track. Why not? Mm-hmm. Why would you wait a year? Just keep going back to it and taking them 90 days at a time. These 90-day chunks. The second one is creating magic. It's the 10 common sense leadership strategies for a life at Disney. And I have tried to apply the idea of Disney and Disney World. Jack Krasinski turned me on to it. But how JPMRC creates an experience for the people that participate in these exercises. And it fits right into what we're trying to create. And then the third one is Results by Gary Nielsen. And it talks about how the first thing you absolutely have to get right in an organization is decision authority. Who makes what decisions? Who's authorized or who has authority to make certain decisions and do things so you can increase the rate at which you make progress. How you share information is the second thing. How you provide feedback back and forth with your team, and communicate. And then the last thing is the structure of the organization. And what he says is if you get the first three things right, the structure of the organization will illuminate itself. It'll tell you how to organize your organization. But too often, especially in the Army, we want to say, here's what the line and block chart looks like. And then we figure out how they're going to share information. And then we figure out who makes what decisions. He's saying, flip it on its head. Decision authority first, how we share information back and forth, and then the organization structure comes and becomes natural.
Oh, yeah. That's what you call an edge organization.
Yeah.
It's an edge organization.
Yeah. Well, thanks, brother. Have a great rest of your Sunday. It's great to talk to you again. When do you head home?
Friday.
So you got one more week.
I head back Friday. I got one more week, and then I start getting on jump status. It's time. It's time.
I can't wait to hear from it. All right, brother. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks.
All right, sir. We'll talk later.
All right. Talk soon. Bye.
All right.
Thanks for listening today. I hope we sparked some thoughts about the people that have inspired you to be who you are today. I hope you share some of your thoughts and better yet, demonstrate them for the people in your life. Our pursuit is to get a little bit better every day. Progress equals small victories stacked on top of each other, building like compound interest. Keep stacking these positive habits. Habits like getting up early, working your butt off, learning something new, being positive, and surrounding yourself with phenomenal people. Please share your comments at the links in the show notes and DM us at Teach Me to Fish podcast on Instagram or Facebook. Looking forward to our next conversation.
Times don't fly too high. Be sure to keep the ground in sight. Fly forever if you keep it tight. Love the world, but keep the sky on your mind.